Now, this year at Grace, our theme is growth. Specifically, your growth. Every message that we preach and teach at Grace will have as its aim your personal growth. Whether that's a very practical habit that you can put into practice in your day-to-day life, or a change to your worldview that makes serving Jesus more productive, it's our hope that by the end of the year, every one of us will be better than we were when we started the year off. Now that might sound a little bit selfish or self-serving, but who knows that the only Jesus that most people in our community will ever see is the Jesus that's reflected in your life and in mine. So it makes perfect sense that we need to get better, that we need to change for the sake of his reputation. And we do that by growing in our love for God, our love for each other, and the practical outworking of that love in our communities. Today, we're starting a 3-part series entitled The ABCs of Church. And I need to say right from the start, I'm not talking about the ABCs of being a Christian. To grow as a Christian, you need to do a number of things. You need to talk to God regularly, you need to read his book, and you need to learn to listen to and obey the Holy Spirit on a daily basis. If you do those 3 things consistently, over time you'll grow and mature in your Christian walk. But I want to talk this morning about how you can grow within the context of church life, the life that we share together corporately. Now, we've talked about this a few times in the past, but I believe that now, more than ever, this subject is really important because across the board, church participation is on the decline in Western society as we become busier and busier, and our recreational and social distractions become more and more time-consuming. There are, however, churches that are growing in their participation, and they're the churches who are engaging well with their communities. You see, the message of Jesus hasn't dated at all in the last 2,000 years. However, some of the traditions or practices of the church have at times gotten in the way of that message. Now, the ABCs of church stand for 3 words that reflect what we do in the context of our church involvement. And the aim of this series isn't necessarily to increase your knowledge as much as to motivate you to action. You can know a lot about fitness, but unless you do something about it, get up off the couch and exercise, you'll remain a couch potato. A very well-informed couch potato maybe, but a couch potato nonetheless. What I find, talking about fitness, what I find crazy about the time that we are in human history at the moment is that we have access to more information, more motivation, more inspiration, more opportunity, more equipment and supplementation for achieving a high level of personal fitness than at any other time in history, and yet we are probably the most unhealthy generation to ever walk the face of the planet. Now, the culprit seems to be, to my mind, besides the amount of non-natural foods that we're eating, changing cultural norms and our preoccupation with personal comfort. It doesn't just affect our fitness. Those two things I mentioned are changing cultural norms and a preoccupation with personal comfort. It doesn't just affect our fitness, it also erodes our connection to the local church and consequently the influence that the local church has in society. And notice I didn't say on society, I said in society. The church isn't meant to impose itself on society. We're meant to be in society, showing through our actions and the love that we have for each other that God loves society and God wants to bring about change. We're supposed to be salt and light. Now, from a very, very young age, and I'm sure many of you would probably identify with this, I've always wanted to know the answer to the why questions. I reckon I drove my mother nearly mad when I was a little kid because I always asked questions. And I really hated being told when I said, well, why, especially the why do we have to do that, I really hated being told because I told you so. 7:30 at night. Some of your parents are going to think, how on earth did my parents manage to do this? But right up until I was in year 8, my bedtime was 7:30. When I was in year 12, my bedtime was 9:30. And some of you parents are thinking, that would be amazing if we could get our kids to bed before midnight. But anyway, it was 7:30. And I remember saying to my mum, Mum, how come I have to go to bed at 7:30? My friends, it's still daylight outside. I can hear my friends playing. And we're all in here in bed at 7:30. How come we got to go? And my mum would say, because we said so. You've got to go to bed. She never gave me a reason. Now, if my mother had turned to me, said to us as kids, look, the reason that you're going to bed at 7:30 is because your dad and I are just at our limit. and we need some time to ourselves. So you need to go to bed so we don't kill one of you. Now, if they'd said that to me, I would have gone, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I thought that there was this magical reason that they had that they wouldn't tell me, because my mother used to also say to me at times, I'll tell you when you get older. When I'd ask the why question, which really frustrated me, because I'm kind of like thinking, Mum, I'm not going to remember the question when I'm older. I need to know the answer now. And I've always struggled with not having an answer to why I'm supposed to do something. When I joined the army, there were so many things that we were told to do that we weren't given a reason for. I mean, why do you have to wear a uniform? Why can't you just choose the clothes you're going to wear? I mean, why can't you just go out and wear anything? But in the army, everybody's got to wear exactly the same clothes. Why do you have to learn how to march in time? Why do you have to do drill? Because when you're fighting a battle, you're not having to march around in time. We were never told why we had to do drill. We were never told why we had to do obstacle courses. Well, we kind of figured out, it's hard, it stresses your body, so maybe it's good for your physical fitness. But on the battlefield, they never put a cargo net up the side of a house to help you climb up to the top of the house. I mean, those things you're not going to find out there. We were never told why we had to do contact drills over and over again when we went out bush. And because we weren't told why we were doing why we had to do the things we were doing, I personally didn't engage with the training nearly as much as I could have. And I often think back to my time in the army, and I think to myself, being the type of person that I am, if they had given me the reasons behind why they wanted us to do certain things, it would have made it much easier for myself to invest in the training, and I would have received greater benefit back from them. When I went to Bible college, the men were told that if we wore shorts, this is in North Queensland, right? So the men were told if we wore shorts, we had to wear long socks. However, the ladies could wear dresses, which are just shorts with one leg, right? They could wear dresses with no socks with their shoes. And so one day, being the obedient child that I was, I decided, I've got to wear long socks, but I'm going to wear thongs with my long socks. A lot of what you older men wear now. But I decided I'm going to wear thongs with my long socks, because if I'm going to wear shorts, I've got to wear long socks. And I hated wearing long socks. And I thought, I'll wear thongs. And I went along, and the poor registrar, because she had no idea why that law had been implemented in the Bible college, so she just didn't know what to do. And so she just told me, I got in trouble, because she said, you're not allowed to wear thongs to class. And I said, but I'm wearing long socks, so it makes the thongs okay. I was just doing it because I just wanted to point out this is a weird rule. I got in a little bit of trouble, but I thought it was worth it at the end. But she had no idea why that rule, sorry, it wasn't a law, why that rule was put in place in Bible college. It was just, if you want to wear shorts as a bloke, you have to wear long socks. Just don't try and wear thongs with your long socks. Now, churches have their own rules and expectations. And it isn't fair to expect something of people without being able to give a good and proper justification for it. If you can't give a logical justification for why you're asking something of a person, you don't have the right to ask it. That's my personal opinion. Just because it's something that we've always done isn't good enough. Tradition doesn't make it right. Just because we've always done it that way doesn't give it some sort of sacred meaning that elevates it above everything else, unless, of course, it does have some sacred meaning, but in that case, you'll have a justification for it. There are 3 simple keys, or I should probably call these habits, that taken together will help you stay connected and flourishing in our church and in any other church you find yourself in the future. And you probably already know all 3 of these, but over these next 3 weeks, I'm going to give you, or hopefully give you, the justification behind us asking these things of you. Now, I want to say right from the outset that these are not 3 things that you have to do to be saved. These are not 3 things that you have to do to be accepted and to be valued and to be a wonderful Christian. These are just simply 3 things that we ask, oftentimes in the context of church life, for you to do because they have incredible value and are very, very profitable if you consistently do them in your life. And I'm just going to try as best I can today to give you the reasoning behind one of them. So what are the ABCs of church, the unnegotiable minimums of a healthy, growing connection to your local church, the things that you can do that will ensure a fruitful and God-honouring progress in your life for you and for those around you? Well, they are, here they are. I'll give you all 3. Attend, belong, and contribute. Now, A stands for attend, a weekly church service. Now, if you're given to cynicism, and none of you are, obviously, but if you're given to cynicism, you could be thinking right about now that I've got an ulterior motive for preaching this type of series. I mean, what pastor wouldn't want their people to attend church regularly? But if you've been with us for any length of time, you'd know that we're not interested here at Grace in building the type of church that manipulates people into action, but we are totally passionate about transformational life experience. God's life experienced by each and every one of us that produces change from the inside out. We also believe in engaging with and overcoming issues that get in the way of all that God has for us through the renewing of our minds, our thinking, so that we're able to discern, as Paul says in Romans 12, what the perfect will of God is. Not being ripped off by deceptive thinking, wrong thinking. So we put a lot of thought and prayer into why we ask you to do the things that we do here at Grace. So the first letter A stands for attend, and what I mean by that is attendance at the weekly gathering that the vast majority of churches host. A gathering that traditionally in Australia takes place on a Sunday. Now, the day it occurs isn't really all that important, but the gathering together is, along with the regularity of its occurrence. Now, as a pastor, you'd expect me to say that, wouldn't you? Thinking, oh, this message that Dermot's preaching this morning, it's all about attending church. Well, I'm speaking to the choir. You're already here, so you're attending, so that's great. But just in case you were thinking about having the next 3 or 4 weeks off today, I'll give you a justification for why it's good for you to attend regularly. Now, as I said, most people would think that as a pastor, I would say that. In fact, some of you might be excused for thinking that I'm personally invested in this type of message, because some people think that having a full church is much better than having a half full church. Well, it does definitely make the leadership look better if they're pastoring a church that's full. But COVID's just completely destroyed that for us, because we've opened up all the seats in here, so everybody just scatters around. The church looks half empty most weekends anyway. But once again, if you've been part of Grace for a long period of time, you realise that we're not interested in bums on seats as much as we're interested in your life being an example of Jesus in whatever community you are in throughout your week. Now, some of you might even secretly wonder if there's any value in being consistent in your church attendance, especially with so many other things making impositions on your time. Now, I know that's the case here at Grace because up to half our church is away on any given Sunday. What does it take for a habit to have a positive impact on your life? Well, it takes time and commitment. Life change takes a lifetime to occur. And unless given time, some of the incredible benefits that come as we honour God through our behaviour will never be realised in our lives. Now, it may come as a bit of a surprise to some of you to learn that I've had my doubts and questions about the validity of attending church every week. As a kid, I grew up in a Catholic family and I had to go to church every single weekend. And you know that when I asked my parents why I had to go, they said to me, because we said so. So when I joined the army and left home, I immediately stopped going to church. And it wasn't until a couple of years later, at the age of 20, that Jesus got a hold of my life and I started attending again. Since then, that was 36 years ago, I have attended church every weekend that I was physically able to, unless I was away on holidays or sick. That's nearly 2,000 weekends. And for half of that time, I attended church twice on a Sunday. During that time, I've seen lots of people come and go. I've been involved in church for a long time now. And during that time, I've seen lots of people come and go. And here's the cold, hard reality that I've observed over and over again. The people who start slipping in their weekly attendance at church, unless they turn that trend around, usually end up falling away from God and sitting by the side of the road, watching as their opportunity to serve God's dream in their generation slips through their fingers. Statistically, people who aren't committed to regular church attendance have a far higher chance of drifting away from their faith than those who are consistent in their attendance. Every person who has ever achieved anything of significant cultural value for Jesus in their generation has been committed to a local church and has placed a high value on regular church gatherings. Now, it could be why we're encouraged in Hebrews chapter 10:25 to continue to gather together. This is not the time to pull away and neglect meeting together, the writer says, as some have formed the habit of doing. In fact, we should come together even more frequently, eager to encourage and urge each other onwards as we anticipate the day dawning. So what is it about the habit of church attendance that's so important? Why is church attendance, regular church attendance, so important? Here's an analogy that might help you. Now, with analogies, you've got to be able to come up with an argument against my analogy, right? It's not perfect. But here's an analogy that might help. Regular attendance at church could be considered the same for a Christian as regular servicing is to your car. And right now, there's probably half of you sitting there thinking, I really need to get my car serviced because I haven't got it done when I should have. Now, if you're regularly detailing and servicing your car, you'll have confidence that your car will be able to handle adverse road conditions and long journeys without it breaking down. We've all heard of car accidents that have killed or maimed the occupants of the car caused by faulty brakes or insufficient tread on tyres, etc., which could have been avoided if the car had been serviced regularly. By booking your car in for regular services, you're preempting issues that might occur whilst out driving throughout the week, and you're keeping your car running at its optimum. When you start to attend church, there are all sorts of repairs that God needs to make, and your progress and growth seems to be quite rapid, especially on the outside. However, as God starts to get you back in good nick, there's less and less that needs to be done at each service, and the temptation is to miss a few here and there. And if you're not careful, before you know it, the rot sets in and we start to justify a non-attendance. Now, we've probably, if you've been around church for a while, you've probably heard this statement: just because you sit in a garage doesn't make you a car. And it's been used to point out that going to church doesn't make you a Christian. So even if you never go to church, you can still believe in Jesus. And that's totally true. Just like if you never exercise, you'll still be able to walk. Probably not very far, and with a greater risk of being injured if you have to exert yourself to get away from a dangerous situation. As one pastor replied to a gentleman who said he no longer got anything out of worship, he said, well, that's okay, we're not worshipping you. It's a great comeback because it illustrates the necessity of regular attendance at church gatherings, because our thinking can get mixed up at times. And sometimes we need help to straighten it out. We stop thinking straight. We start to forget. We no longer remember the goodness of God, which is why we started attending in the first place. And now it becomes an imposition on our free time, and before we know it, we're attending once a month, which works out to 12 times a year. Now imagine if you only exercise once a month. What would happen if you only ate once a month? Or only washed once every 4 weeks? Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to realise that for some things to have a positive impact on our lives, we need to do them regularly, because let's get real. It's the things you do regularly that shape your life, not the one-offs.
That's true.
You eat a healthy meal once a month, and the rest of the time you eat junk. Guess what? You'll struggle with health issues. But what about the people who attend church for years and are mean, grumpy, judgmental people? There is this false idea in society that the longer you are involved in church and the more committed you are to church, the weirder you'll become and the worst type of person you will be. When I was going through my Bachelor of Education, one of the subjects that we were doing was literature and literacy, and every single book that we had to review in that subject had a grumpy, mean, narrow-minded old Christian who made life miserable for every person around them. Every single book had a Christian in it. Over the last, I think it started a couple of years back, there's been a series that hopefully not too many of you will have been watching, but a series that's become quite popular amongst our younger and also older generation, called Handmaid's Tale. I think that's what it's called, The Handmaid's Tale. And it's about I was going to say, has anybody seen it? Don't put your hand up, right? And I've read the synopsis and I've had discussions with people about it, and it's a horrifying series. People are absolutely invested in it. It's a horrifying series from a church perspective, because it's all about, it's set in the future, and it's all about this cult-like organisation that uses religion to oppress people, and it is a shocker. The problem is, in our culture, when you watch something like that, it impacts or affects the way you feel. Not just about that movie, but about anything to do with religion. And how do I know that? Because if you go to most Australians and you show them a picture of someone who's dressed like a Muslim, so many Australians will instantly think terrorist. Somebody who's out to kill them because of jihad. The reality of it is that 99.9% of Muslims would never consider blowing anybody up or killing anyone. And yet so many people in our society, when they see Muslims or hear talk about Muslims, they think, oh, these are the guys, let's stay away from them. These are scary people. The vast majority of them aren't scary at all. The vast majority of them are just like you and I. But the power of perception can get into our hearts and can begin to warp how we feel about things. And there is a perception in society that if you are committed to a church, that you'll become a weirdo, you'll become a really strange person. And I'd like to address that fallacy this morning, right up. I'd like to suggest, and I can prove this over and over again just from people within our own local church, but I'd like to suggest that the longer you have been attending church, the nicer you become, the more loving you become, the more open-minded you become, the better friend you become, the better member of society you become. In fact, the people that attend church regularly across the board are some of the nicest people you will meet in any community. And we complain about ourselves at times, and the media wants to complain about us at times. But you look around our church, you find anybody who's been regularly attending church, and I guarantee you'll find that they are lovely people when you get to know them. Now, there are always, and you're probably sitting there, if you're like me, you always look for the exception, right? There are always aberrations. There are always exceptions to every rule. But if you make a decision about your future behaviour based on an aberration, based on an exception to the rule, you are a fool. Oh. I've been wanting to say, I've been practicing saying that all week, But the truth of the matter is, if you base your future behaviour on an exception to the rule, that is a foolish thing to do. Now, once again, I'm speaking to the choir here. You obviously haven't because you're at church this morning, but you need to realize, because these things will come up. These questions will come up, and they may not come up in your mind, but they will come up in the minds of people that are around you, especially your children. And you need to be able to give them, not just simply say to them, you've got to go to church because I said so, but actually give them reasons for why church is beneficial for them. And also be aware of the pressures that society is putting on them to not be involved and not be committed to church, not be committed to the gathering together of church people. And there's this fear out there that if you commit to church gatherings, you'll become a weirdo. There are some weirdos out there, but they don't come to church. I run across some real strange people. I run across some really interesting conspiracy theorists in our community. I engage a little bit on social media, and I tell you what, sometimes I really wonder about the mentality of some people. It's like they think that the whole world is out to get them. And it's like just the other day on Facebook, somebody put up a thing about the airport, the roadworks down at our airport. And they were going on about how the government is allowed that to blow out, and they're having to spend more money down there. It's taken a lot longer. And I'm kind of like looking at it going, there is not a single politician that I know of, whether they're Liberal, Labor, or Greens, or whatever, or Independent, that are thinking up ways of making projects blow out. They all want the projects to blow in, right? They want everything to be finished on time because it doesn't do them any good. But people they're out, they're commenting, and I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, you're just not thinking logically. And then everybody gets on the bandwagon, and the bag of people. It's like, what do you actually think people lie in bed at night and think of ways to spend more money on a project rather than save money? And you think people lie in bed at night thinking of ways to make a project last for 2 years and stir up as much angst as they possibly can with all the motorists, because that's what they like doing. And nobody does that. And yet people write their stuff all the time. Have you ever read, like news, news.com is interesting because they often let you read the comments. Have you ever read some of the comments to some of their articles? Some really, really interesting people out there. But I think it can get really warped and can get really affected and impacted by those that are around us. And the truth of the matter is that if you are a regular church goer, over time, Jesus will have gotten a hold of your life, and he will gradually rub off a whole heap of the rough edges if you give him the opportunity to do that. When we gather together for a church service, you can be pretty sure a certain number of things will occur each time. We'll spend focused time with Jesus. We'll have a time of corporate worship. We'll pray. we'll read something from the Bible, we'll hopefully listen to some anointed teaching, and we'll have time to hang out with others who need the gift of our life that week. Jesus himself said in Matthew 18:19-20, I also tell you this, if two of you agree here on earth concerning anything you ask, my Father in heaven will do it for you. For where 2 or 3 gather together as my followers, I am there among them. Now God is with us all the time, but there is something special about gathering together with other believers that we don't always experience when we're alone at home with him. Every time you place yourself in that type of environment, the church, like a church service, you give Jesus an opportunity to work on your life. But here's the catch. The effect of gathering together is cumulative. That means the benefits to your life builds up over time. Now, you can go to the gym, lift a lot of weight, go home, stand in front of the mirror, and see absolutely no change whatsoever. You go out for a jog in the morning before work and still feel just as tired during the day as you did on the day that you didn't jog before going to work. It takes time for the changes to take place. And unfortunately, most change in our lives is really small, even though we're talking here about cumulative change. It's really small, so you don't really notice it, and you also get used to it. So you don't realise that you're actually getting fitter, you don't realise you're getting stronger, you don't realise that church is changing the way you view others and the way you view Jesus until you're way down the track and then something happens that in the past you couldn't cope with, but you realise you can cope with it, and at that point you go, aha, something has changed. The benefits only come over time. But what about those who've been going to church for years? Now, some of you here have been going to church even longer than I have. After a while, doesn't it become repetitive? Don't you get bored going to church every single week? Well, in Joshua chapter 1, verses 7 to 8, Joshua, recording the words that God had given him, he says this, be strong and very courageous, be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you, do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night so you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. Over and over again, the first 5 books of the Bible, Moses reiterated, because God told him to, how important it was that we remember. Because if we don't remember regularly, we soon forget. In fact, just as we read in Joshua, there's a blessing of success that comes to all who make a habit of remembering. I'm sure that some of you have had times or seasons where you haven't been able to get to church for a period of time, for whatever reason. And then you finally get back to church, and you know the day you get back, you finally get it all together and you come along to church and you're kind of like, there's lots of reasons why I shouldn't come. But you get there and the worship starts and you just go, this is so good. It's so good to be able to worship God together with other Christians. And you remember. See, it's really easy to forget when you get out of the habit. But then you come back in and you remember, this is really, really good for my soul. This is really good for me. This is helping me to once again readjust my focus and to get my focus back on Jesus, because the world will constantly try and pull your focus off Jesus and place your focus on you and your problems. But when you come to church, you're reminded that, hang on, it's not just about me having it all together. There's someone greater than me who loves me, is interested in my life, and he's the one that I need to be focused on, not just myself. Now, there is a danger, though, when we come to church regularly, of simply going through the motions. Just coming along, worship time happens, you're just kind of singing and looking around, or maybe you're not even singing, maybe you're not even worshiping, you're just kind of like waiting for that to get through. And then the prayer happens, and you might close your eyes, but you're kind of like thinking about other stuff. That is a danger. Because church is only as powerful as your capacity to engage with it, right? Sure. So you've got to engage your heart. So when worship happens, even if you've been to You've been to church for 2,000 weekends. You just go to it. It's like, I'm here for the first time and I'm here to worship Jesus and I'm going to engage my heart. I remember as a Catholic, some of you have heard my story, when as a Catholic kid at 14 years of age, it was like Catholic services run like clockwork, and you do the same thing every single time. You say the same prayers, you sing songs. You don't sing choruses over and over again like we do. You just sing them once, and then it's on to the next one. And then you have these certain prayers that you pray, and there's certain times you kneel down, you stand up, and you can get to a point where you just know what's coming up next, and you become really used to it. And for me, there was just like I'd go to mass because I had to, because my parents made me go along, and I got nothing. I was getting nothing out of it. But then we went through. Our whole family went through a season where my dad's drinking just became really, really bad. And during that time, I started to pray and started to reach out to God. And I remember as a 14-year-old kid making a decision that when I was at mass, I was going to mean every prayer that you had to pray. So all the prayers, I knew all the prayers off by heart. And I made a decision, I'm going to mean every prayer I pray. And as soon as I started to mean what I was praying, the whole service lit up. It came alive, and Jesus touched my life because I engaged with what I was doing. Now that's in the Catholic Church, but it can happen in our style of church as well. We like to pride ourselves on the fact that we're a little bit freer, and we do things, we're a little bit more relevant to culture, etc., etc. But the reality of it is we can be just as traditional. We can come along to a service like this and just be totally unengaged. And if you're unengaged, you're not going to get the value from the service that you could. You need to engage. But that affects every area of our lives if we don't engage. It can affect our marriages, it can affect our hobbies, it can affect everything. So is attending church regularly important? Absolutely. Without it, you'll struggle in your Christian walk. It's a preventative measure that ensures you're in good nick, ready to respond to challenges when life throws you a curveball, a pothole, a drunken driver. It doesn't stop bad things happening to you, but it helps you to deal with them when they do. And lastly, going to church regularly protects your family. By taking time each week to gather together with Jesus and others, you're making a statement that over time builds your character and commitment to Jesus and is noticed by everyone in your family. You're saying each week to your family that Jesus is worthy of your time, and so is the rest of the church that you're a part of. You're letting your kids see that your relationship with Jesus involves being committed to other people, which we'll talk about more next week. But that in itself is huge for the future well-being of your kids. That your faith isn't just about you and Jesus, but it's about you and Jesus and others. And I think in the society that we're living in at the moment, where everything is becoming so self-focused, that message that Christianity isn't lived in a silo, in a vacuum, away from everyone else. It's not just about my relationship with God. It's actually lived, yes, my relationship with Jesus, but also in relationship with others. You're giving by being a regular attender at church. You're giving your kids the best opportunity that you can to help them develop a habit that will safeguard them in the future. It won't guarantee that they'll stay committed, but it will definitely give them a leg up at the start. My parents smoked all through my growing up years, and 6 out of my 7 siblings, all 6 of my sisters, ended up smoking. My brother and I were the only ones that were pure. But my 6 sisters ended up smoking. My parents gave up smoking later on in life, and so did all of my siblings except for one. She took up pot smoking. She probably gave up cigarettes, but she took on something bit harder. Now, regardless of all of the other benefits that come to me personally through attending church regularly, I was going to say, teach my kids not to smoke is the reason. Regardless of all the other benefits that I get, that alone, being able to help my kids develop a habit that will safeguard them going forward, makes it worthwhile. As Glenn Barrett posted this week, parents that treat the church as optional shouldn't be surprised when their children treat Jesus as unnecessary. Now, if I could mute those back, that'd be great. Now, I'm a pastor, right? So it makes it doubly difficult for my kids. They just don't have a choice, right? They just got to come to church up until a certain age, and then they get to choose. But makes it a little bit more difficult. But the reality of it is, in our family life is not much different to yours. I'm usually the first person up in the morning, and then I head off to work. Then I come home from work of an evening, and we do our evening stuff, and then I go to bed before everybody else, because they're not following in the footsteps of their father when he was when he was young at a very early time. But the one consistent thing that my kids have seen all the way through has been our attendance regularly at church. Now, here's the question. You might have a great relationship with Jesus, but how do your kids know that? Where do they see that being outworked? Where do they see the time commitment that you're giving to Jesus? Now, when you come to church regularly, you don't have to say to your kids Jesus is important to you, because they get to see it week in, week out. Now, kids, they go through different stages, and sometimes our kids are just like I was when I was growing up. Why do I have to go to church? I don't want to go to church. Well, I told you, you've got to come to church. I'm the pastor of the church. You've got to come to church. Doesn't look good if you don't come to church. You know, it's like, in our family, and I've been guilty of this. In our family, I've said to my kids, well, as long as you're living here, you're coming. And I'm sure some parents at times have said that to their children. But the truth of the matter is, because we go regularly to church, my kids know that God and Jesus mean something to their parents. And they've seen that over and over and over and over and over again. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of weeks have gone past, and my kids have seen us going to church. So they know that we are committed to Jesus. And when they were young, they had to go. Now, as I said, it would be wonderful if just by going to church you could absolutely guarantee that your kids would continue to go to church and continue in their relationship with Jesus. That doesn't always happen. And it's one of the things that a lot of Christian parents have to carry, especially older parents have to carry in their hearts. They've got loved ones that no longer come to church. But the reality of it is that those habits that you establish early on, they never go away. They never leave the psyche of a child, even when they're an adult and they've left home. Because even though I decided I wasn't going to go to church after I left home and joined the army, it was always there in the back of my mind. And if you'd talked to me, you would have thought, nah, this guy's got no interest whatsoever in church. He's got no interest in God. But it was always there in the back of my mind, because all through my early years, we had to go. And all through my early years, I was experiencing truth on a regular basis, taken out of the Bible, about God. And I had a number of it. There were a number of times where I had personal encounters with Jesus during those years. It's incredibly powerful, and you have no idea, as parents, you have no idea when God is going to be able to get through to your kids. You just got to give them as many opportunities as they possibly can have for that to happen.